All right, day 3 of deviance and taking another perspectives look at why people decide to violate norms and do something different. So we're going to address the functionalist perspective, which believes nothing exists for no reason. Everything has a purpose, a responsibility. We have different statuses because we have different roles to play within our society, and we won't function if all these roles aren't fulfilled, if all these groups don't exist. So by that theory, functionalism would say deviance actually serves a purpose. So while I'm doing this lesson, you're going to fill in your functionalist perspective worksheet. Again, go back to your case study, maybe reevaluate some of the feedback you got on your symbolic work, and use that to keep adding to your portfolio. Right, so if deviance serves a purpose, what purpose does this serve? It allows us to have a chance to evaluate our norms. This is what we have been doing. Do we want to keep doing this? All right, sometimes as societies grow and evolve and change, we need to alter our norms as well. And so people who deviate from those norms actually give us a moment to address if this is something we want to keep changing into, or maybe revert back to the traditional behaviors. Right, deviance could also help unite groups. I see this person violating the norms and I agree with them, I like what they're doing. So now I'm going to keep joining them. And as these groups grow and grow with numbers, our counterculture groups might actually become a subculture and then the dominant culture. All right, we could also bond together against these deviant groups. I don't like these norm violators, and I find other people who dislike them as well. And so I get bonded to them, and it can help strengthen our ideals. All right, if we are evaluating the norms, and I find a large group of people who also think we should violate the norms, well, then maybe deviance actually leads to a lot of our changes. Some of you picked political activist groups. Right? Those political activists are fighting to change society, and they're deviant now, but maybe those norms will become the dominant norms. And so it can actually promote change and help societies evolve and grow. So the main theory that we're going to address for functionalism is something known as strain theory. So let's get some background terms down first before we can address what strain theory actually says. Remember from quarter 3, every culture has specific values that they follow. And because we value these things, we're told that you should work towards them. And so we would call these your cultural goals. We talked about how the United States, how Good Counsel values education. So one of the goals that Good Counsel gives you is you should get into a college. Right? We're a college preparatory school. We don't ask, are you going to college? We ask where you're going to college. So that one little change in the question actually indicates a core value of our culture. And so a cultural goal of Good Counsel might be get into college, which means we need to teach you the norms of achieving that goal. Those norms are the institutionalized means. These are the appropriate, normal way of getting that goal. So if Good Counsel says you should get into college, well, how do you do that? You take the SAT, the ACT, you study, you do your homework, you pay attention in class, you get involved with extracurriculars, you do your clubs and your sports, you make friends with the teachers, they write you a good recommendation. All right, so there are all these different ways, things you could do to help you get into college. So I want you to think about the culture of your society. The group, when your deviant case study came into existence, what is that culture telling that deviant they should want? You're not talking about their deviant behavior just yet. You're talking about their cultural goals and those institutionalized needs. So if you look at the second page of the functionalist worksheet, I used Thanos from Avengers to kind of address this idea. Right? In the culture that Thanos grew up in before he decided to go on his murder spree, they looked at conservation. They valued life and that we should do everything to keep the majority of the population alive. And so the institutionalized means of doing that would be recycle, reduce plastic consumption, improve healthcare. Right? All of these would be institutionalized means, approved ways that the dominant culture would say you could achieve that cultural goal of conserving life. All right, so take a moment and think about the culture of the start of your deviant case study, and then tell me, what is that culture teaching society they should want? What are the cultural goals? And then tell me, what are the normative, institutionalized means that people would follow to get there? And then whenever you have that section filled in, start the lesson back up and move on to the next part. All right, so where strain theory comes in is what they believe is that not everyone's going to get the cultural goals, and the institutionalized means aren't going to work for everyone. All right, and that is going to put pressure on the population. Just because you study doesn't mean you're guaranteed that A. And just because you try to be friendly with the teacher doesn't mean they're going to like you. Right? And so these institutionalized means don't work for everybody. Sometimes it's easier for some and harder for others. Right? And this cultural goal, if everyone started applying to University of Maryland, well, it becomes harder and harder to get in. So in my generation, when I was at Good Counsel, Maryland was the safety school. Everyone applied there knowing they would get in. But now, for your generation, that is a reach school. That's a harder school to get into because they are more selective. And so even that goal of getting into college, not everyone can get into the same college, and not everyone maybe wants to go to college. So what strain theory states is that if you're raised in a culture where you're told this is our measure of success, and this is what you're supposed to be doing, that doesn't guarantee everyone's going to get there. And it causes pressure and discomfort and strain on individuals. And so it encourages them to actually be deviant rather than to follow the conformist ways. So here's a breakdown of what deviance theory states. It's based off of Robert K. Merton's ideas. And so the majority of the population are going to be conformist, which means they accept the cultural goals and they accept institutionalized means. But our deviant individuals, they don't like doing that, and so they reject one or both of them. All right, maybe I give up on the goals. It's not important for me. I'm not going to work towards that goal anymore, and so you give up on that. All right, maybe you reject the institutionalized means. These norms aren't working for me, and so I reject those means. I'm not following those norms anymore, and you do something else. And so there are way more deviant paths than there are conformist paths towards following society. And even though most people will fall closer to the conformity realm, there are a lot of people who would use these deviant pathways to help them navigate their new positions in society. So let's take a look at each of them in turn and talk about what that might look like in action. Why aren't you moving? There we go. All right. All right. So a lot of people, they'll probably be innovators. I want that cultural goal, but I'm not going to follow the institutionalized means. That goal is still desirable, but the means don't work for me, so I'm going to do something else. If I want that A and studying isn't working, well, maybe I'll cheat. Maybe I'll try and bribe the teacher. And so I still want the goal of the A, but I find alternative ways of getting there. Ritualism is I still do the institutional means, I still follow the norms, but I've given up on ever actually achieving that cultural goal. All right, so even though I don't think I'm ever going to get into college, and college isn't something that I really truly want, I'm still signing up to take the SATs like everybody else. I'm still getting involved with the clubs and the sports. I still ask my teachers to write me recommendation letters. I don't see any success in these movements, but I'm just kind of going through the motions. I'm ritualizing everything. And so I look conformist from the outside, but my internal state is more deviant. Right? In both of these cases, they've given up on half of the equation, and so they aren't doing what society says they're supposed to, and so they're not functioning properly. They're not fully fulfilling those roles that society's dictated for them. Right? Our innovators, they are coming up with new ways, and so those new norms that might bond people together. We've got our ritualists that have kind of almost given up on that success, and so the goals that they're supposed to be working for, motivating society to keep bettering themselves, they don't see themselves being that betterment, and so they almost succumb and fall down. And so these two groups that even just give up on half of the equation are also deviant while still going through the society with most of people. Right? Our other two pathways, they've given up on everything. All right, I don't want that cultural goal anymore, and I don't want the institutionalized means. And so they do something completely different. Right? These pathways are seen as more deviant than maybe our ritualists or our innovators. All right? Retreaters, they are all about themselves. They take themselves away from society and they focus just on their own individual personalized means. And so the book makes a good argument for drug addicts. Right? The goal of a drug addict is to find more drugs and get high. And so the institutionalized means is anything that helps them find drugs. Right? They don't care about society. They don't care about their position, their status, how their behaviors might impact others. And so they're deviant in the sense where they isolate themselves from society and they remove themselves from what others are doing. Our rebels, they still remain a part of society, but they try to change society. And so they're fighting to alter things. They're going to come up with a new goal that they think is more important, and they're going to develop new institutionalized means, the new appropriate ways of getting those goals. So for example, during this isolation distance learning period, you may have heard that a lot of AP exams, IB exams are being altered. They're being canceled. Well, maybe we don't give you the goal of getting into college. We're just going to give you the goal of learning, like developing these skills, developing this knowledge base, not for the incentive of the A, but just for the experience and maybe the joy of knowing things. Right? Maybe these rebels, these distance learners, they could make that the new normative educational practice. And so the institutionalized means would be self-motivated learning, inquisitive thinking, going out and looking for new alternative ways of finding information. Right? We're trying to alter the way that society functions while still being connected to it. The book makes a good argument that a lot of members of the civil rights movement in the United States, they changed the cultural goal. Specifically, if we looked at the Supreme Court decision, the Brown versus a Board of Education means that everything is equal, and so we need to integrate most of society. And it violated the original court decision of Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. Right? They fought for redefining those cultural goals and giving new institutionalized means to indicate that society needs to evolve and grow and change. All right, so take a moment, go and look at your case study for deviance and see if you can figure out what path they're on. All right, are they innovators? Are they ritualists where they've only given up on half of the equation? Or have they completely changed the rule book, given up on both the cultural goals and institutionalized means, and they might be more retreaters or rebels? So see if you can define and explain what pathway your deviant is on. And then once you're ready to move on with the worksheet, restart this lesson. All right. What we know is that most deviants fall on the innovation pathway. We get so socialized to wanting these goals that it's very unlikely, it's very hard for people to give them up. Many do, but most of our society is built towards controlling our innovators. And so functionalism would also look at what in society makes it easy to be an innovator and therefore makes it easier for them to violate the norms while still working towards those goals. All right, a lot of our laws that have been enacted, right, they're because we're trying to prevent our innovators. A law that's in the rule book only exists because somebody once did this. Society says we don't like it, so we want you to stop it. So illegitimate opportunity structures are groups, structures built into society that makes it easier for us to come up with new ways of getting to those cultural goals. So for example, you are a good person. I know you would never cheat. But if you decided to cheat, do you know how you could do it? Yeah. Maybe you go and ask somebody who's taken the class before, what was the essay on the test? Or maybe you get really I don't know, deviant, and you get a cheat sheet where you write down all the answers on your calculator, on a note card, or on your leg, and you look at it while you're taking the test. Right? Having that friend that you could talk to, that person who's selling you the answers to the test, right? Those are illegitimate opportunity structures. They're groups embedded into society that makes it easier for you to be deviant and follow these alternative means of getting to that cultural goal. All right, so some of these opportunity structures are called street crimes. And we're going to return to this more next class when we look at conflict theory. All right, street crime is the more common way of breaking the norms. There are set statuses and roles within criminal communities. So, for example, if I steal your car and I want to sell it, well, I need a chop shop to go to that will be able to remove the VIN number and then they can sell it on the street. Or they just take all the parts out of the car and they sell those parts, and then there's no car left that looks like it was stolen, so I get away with the crime. Right? There are set statuses. There's the person who's actually out stealing the cars. There's the person who's running the chop shop. There's the person who's reselling those stolen goods rather. So each of them has a specific status. They have a specific role within that criminal community. All right, you can do this as part of a gang, and we all have our own individual statuses. So, for example, like drug dealing usually happens within gangs, and there's the head of the gang, and there are the lieutenants, and then there's the street minions that are out actually doing the legwork of selling the drugs versus you need the suppliers. Or this could be solo work where you work independently, but you still need to be connected to society and be able to sell whatever it is you're stealing. Right. With street crime, it's a lot easier to track these behaviors. Because there's set statuses and roles, there are established social networks that we can go through. And so if I know that a car was stolen, and I know that Joe Bob owns a chop shop, mechanic that has been known to sell stolen goods, well, I can go through him and try and figure out, well, who's stolen a Lamborghini in the last 3 days. All right, because there's face-to-face interaction between the criminal and the victim, we can also get more details about their specific status. What did they look like? What was their mannerisms? Were they alone or in a group, and therefore where they might be? So, for example, a lot of criminal investigators are trying to take apart the power of gangs within communities. Well, they actually need to know the social structure, and so it's easy to kind of track who is a part of the system by knowing all these social networks. All right, white-collar crime, on the other hand, this is more likely to be committed by members of our upper social statuses. It's a little harder to track because it tends to be more isolated, and there's little face-to-face interaction between the victim and the perpetrator. So, for example, embezzlement, insider trading, those are white-collar crimes where there are definitely victims in the situation, but it's a little harder to track that through social networks. Embezzlement is where I steal money from investors or from my business and I put it towards my own personal funds, my own personal means. Right? Insider trading is I use my knowledge from Wall Street to buy or sell stock that I know is going to start doing really well or is about to tank. Well, if I know that this business is struggling and I know that they're about to have a big drop in their stock value, well, if I tell 5 other friends and they tell 5 other friends and they all start selling their stock, well, that's obviously going to tank that company's worth and therefore almost lead into the likelihood of them failing. But in those situations, who do I blame? Is it the first person who said, oh, this company isn't doing well? Is it me who told 5 friends? Is it them who told 5 friends each? Right? Those social networks are a little bit harder to trace back to the original perpetrator, and therefore it's harder to enforce and it's harder to kind of prevent. Right? We still have things that make it easier. Their lack of accountability. Right? Corporate crime, that would be another example that's committed by upper level businesses instead of individuals, like white collar crime. So those Enron officials who stole to fund their business and lied to investors to keep them doing keeping money coming in. You could say the BP oil spill, where they didn't do the appropriate safety checks because they wanted to keep pumping oil out of the system. Right? Those are businesses that have no accountability. They don't really have to report to many people, and so they can get away with crimes for longer periods of time and sometimes do more damage. So we'll get into this more next class, but the fear of the violent street crimes where there's that face-to-face interaction versus corporate crime, which can steal way more money but is not as regulated and as dangerous, they almost get away with it for longer. And so those opportunity structures only available to the upper level regions of society, but can be almost more damaging to the social structures and the roles underneath them. All right, so take a minute and think about the opportunity structures present for your deviant that help them break those norms. What are some social networks that they were a part of? What are some examples of street crimes that maybe they committed? What are some examples of corporate crime or white-collar crime that they potentially committed? All right, what are the groups that they use to help them be deviant and break away from what the rest of society is doing? All right, once you've gotten that done, that is your worksheet for the day, so just submit it and I will get you feedback as soon as possible. Again, I'll be on Zoom today at noon, so if you have any questions you want to ask me in person, log online or just send me an email and I'll respond as soon as I see it. All right, have a great day.